Staying Alive is the name of the game in Saturday's film premiere at 10:20 on Central.
Take me home, please.
My place or yours?
Goldie Hawn, Chevy Chase and Dudley Moore star in this thrilling comedy, where the innocent come face to face with the not-so-innocent.
My God!
Oh, no.
Oh, yes. Try it again.
You can't lose.
Saturday evening, we have The Price is Right at 7:30. Tales of the Unexpected, which is entitled A Girl Can't Always Have Everything, starring Joan Collins, of all people. Cat's Eyes is on at 9:20, and of course the Now Movie.
Don't get complex.
Good.
Amplex.
Fresh breath capsules from the Amplex Total Freshness range.
Improved Kitty Cat. Chunkier and tastier. With all the meat and nourishment a cat needs every day.
When you're hungry for a bowl, no point devouring something small. Get your mousy tongue round these waters. When you feel you could eat a horse, or not amused by your main course, or you can sum up referees. Waters!
Hey, when you're cheesed off, say cheese.
Roast beef, roast beef, roast beef. Ah! Oh, chop, chop, chop. It's the cheese roast beef. Chock-a-block, chock-a-chock. Can't be beat roast beef. Oh, chop, 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 chock-a-block, chock-a-chock. Lick it, chew it, so much. Do it. Got it, get it. Roast beef.
Gold from St. Ivel. Half the fat and a buttery taste. Rolled into one.
Lying in the garden, dying of thirst, thought I'd never survive. So the word got round about a cool fruit drink called Britvic 55. 55% pure orange juice with a tingle and a sparkle on top. Fruity, long, refreshing.
It's a very nice
Oh,
try.
it's burning hot in the garden, but I'm starting to revive. With a sparkle and a tingle from a cool fruit drink called Britvic 55.
You are entering back zone by the door, please. You are entering back zone.
Web J694532.
Good morning.
Had an appointment, an interface. Inputs deficiency.
10,002, you're late.
I know.
Voice ident.
Web J, an appointment.
Inputs deficiency.
Yes, I know.
Your interface has been moved to room 10050. You're late.
I know. Web J694532.
Ah, yes. Of course. You're late.
I know, but I can explain.
I'm sorry, I'm not programmed to accept extra.
You mean I can't have an overdraft?
We cannot authorize
I need a personal transporter for my work.
It's my duty to tell you.
Won't you even discuss it?
An input deficiency
Is
cannot
there anyone I can
authorize
talk
here.
to about an overdraft? Why can't I just talk to somebody?
Do you worry that the more banks become automated, the more you'll become just a number?
I think we can help you there. Take a seat. Have you thought about a Barclay loan?
At Barclays, our customer service program is retraining 50,000 staff. So in our future, you'll get the expert advice and personal service you should expect.
For Saturday action at 9:15 on Central, make a date with Cat's Eyes, starring Jill Gascoigne, Leslie Ash, Tracy Louise Ward, and Don Warrington. Perfect action and excitement for Saturdays at 9:15. Cat's Eyes on Central.
You're watching Central and TVI.
Scientists at work analysing rust. The rust comes from the inside of a Magnox nuclear reactor. The Magnox reactor is the workhorse that still produces much of Britain's electricity. The one at Barclay in Gloucestershire is 24 years old. Most of the rest are over 20. And the question that's now being asked, are these Magnox reactors too old to be trusted? 30 years ago, British scientists were among the first in the world to design a system which used the nuclear reaction to generate electricity. The method they chose was to burn uranium fuel, wrapped in a metal called Magnox. A series of Magnox reactors were built in the early 60s and are still in use. Today, TVI has learned that one of Britain's older Magnoxes has been ordered to suspend operations in November for inspection and repair. The problem is rust.
Britain's first commercial nuclear power station at Barclay, Gloucestershire, is only 6 months away from generating electricity for the national grid.
The commercial Magnox program began with Barclay Power Station in 1962. It really seemed that a new age had dawned. 24 years later, the nuclear industry is on the defensive. Barclay has kept running through oil embargoes and miners' strikes. But by today's standards, some of its safety features are primitive. Its vital coolant circuits are exposed outside the main building. There is no secondary containment. The plant is now 4 years past its provisional design life of 20 years. The Central Electricity Generating Board says there is nothing to worry about. But Liberal MP Paddy Ashdown says the older Magnoxes should be closed.
If you had a car 25 years old, it would begin to get very decrepit. Nothing special about nuclear power that absolves it from the process of aging like anything else. What worries me, I think, more than that, is the fact that this is a 20 or maybe even 30-year-old design, and that the Magnox were designed to the standards of safety required in that day, not today. And I am perfectly clear, indeed it has been admitted to me, that if these power stations were now placed in the hands of the Nuclear Installation Inspectorate for licensing today, they would not be licensed on safety reasons.
Already, one early Magnox reactor is faced with the possibility of permanent closure. It's not in Britain, but at Latina in Italy. It's one of only 2 Magnox reactors that were exported to other countries. Now some Italian politicians are calling for it to close because they say it's obsolete. And the plant director fears the government may give way.
I would be very very bitter, because it would be it would not be a technical decision, and because we are, not only me but all the staff, all the personnel working here is really convinced that it is a safe station.
In spite of that confidence, the Italians have admitted that some of the safety systems here need updating. While in Britain, reviews of the earliest Magnoxes have been delayed, Italian nuclear inspectors have openly called for measures costing £10 million. They include an additional electricity supply to the vital coolant pumps, a backup feed water supply, and new electronic controls for the emergency gas coolant. But in the Italian town of Latina, 3 miles away, the Russian nuclear accident has turned many people against the British Magnox. A radiation monitoring unit has been sent here to check for leaks from the plant. And the town's mayor denies that he's overreacting.
My personal conviction is that the reactor should be closed. This is for several reasons. It has come to the end of its service life. It was intended to run for 20 years and has now been in operation for 25. Second, before the Chernobyl disaster, our nuclear inspectors had found out that safety work needed to be carried out. So even before our fears were revived by Chernobyl, the station was not considered to be totally safe.
The mayor is now on a personal crusade to close down Latina's reactor. He's a Christian Democrat or conservative and backs the idea of nuclear power. But 2 weeks ago, he set out for his party congress to campaign for an old Magnox to be closed down. Britain has 18 commercial Magnox reactors on 9 sites. They are Barclays in Gloucestershire, Bradwell, Essex, Hunterston in Scotland, Dungeness, Kent, Hinckley Point in Somerset, Sizewell, Essex, Trawsfynydd in Wales, Albury, Gloucestershire, and Wilver on Anglesey. 14 of the reactors are 20 years old or more, but the Magnox has some strong defenders.
The Magnox reactors were built with the technology of the 50s. They were designed to operate safely with the technology that was available at the time. And that means that they didn't have a very big power output for their size. In other words, they're physically pretty large reactors with a small output by today's standards. It also means that they're very stable in operation and they respond very slowly. The power levels change slowly. Things happen slowly. If things go wrong, they go wrong slowly. And this means you have a lot of time to take whatever action is necessary to put them right.
This is a simple model of a Magnox reactor. Heat is generated by the uranium fuel here in the core. The main feature of the Magnox is that the coolant is gas, which is pumped into the reactor through these pipes and leaves up here to transfer its heat into the boilers. British designers chose gas because they believed it would be less dangerous than water, and many would say that Chernobyl has proved them right. But the gas system has its own problems. Scientists have discovered that gas can sometimes rust the metal components at the heart of the reactor. At the start of the 70s, control rooms in all but one of Britain's commercial Magnoxes were told to cut power output in a bid to stop corrosion. Power and so temperature was cut by up to 29%. This process was called derating.
In 69 through to 71, the operators, the CGB, derated their stations. They lowered the temperature and cleaned up the active gas circuits. That stopped the accelerated rate of corrosion that occurred up to that time. But there's no reason to believe technically that the actual corrosion stopped completely. And it looks as though the corrosion has gone on at a much slower rate from about 71.
The question is, how much damage is the corrosion doing to vital components inside the reactors? And can even the scientists be sure about the answer? In our investigation, we've found concern about a series of key parts. The latest worry is corrosion of the standpipes, the pipes at the top of the reactor through which it's refueled. There's concern about welds in several areas. If welds failed up here, for example, bits of metal could drop into the fuel channels of the reactor. And there's debate about the state of vital bolts and straps that hold the graphite core together. CEGB scientists are working on these questions, but most of the time their efforts are veiled in secrecy. Critics of the Central Electricity Generating Board say that getting up-to-date information about the Magnoxes is a difficult and frustrating process. This is Hinckley Point in Somerset, which on December the 2nd last year was the scene of an extraordinary meeting which showed the depth of suspicion on all sides. Face to face in the administration building were the station's management and the Liberal MP, Paddy Ashdown.
We had a good meeting, if somewhat tense at times, but at the end of the meeting, one of my assistants opened a door, by mistake incidentally, and there found a man with a tape recorder and a pair of headphones on his head, and it appeared then that the meeting had been taped. Now, maybe there are good reasons for taping a meeting like that. If someone had asked me, I don't suppose I would have objected, providing I'd been given a copy of the tape afterwards. But to tape a meeting with a member of Parliament without asking him, or even doing him the courtesy of informing him of this beforehand, is, I think, wrong. I think it's rather typical of the CEGB's attitude, and I think it is very discourteous, and it's very worrying.
But in the meeting, and doubtless on the tape, a key fact came out. Reactor 1 at Hinckley is suffering from a new outbreak of corrosion. The rust doesn't pose immediate safety problems, but dealing with it could mean major repairs, undreamt of when the reactor was first commissioned. Beneath this floor are more than 100 standpipes which are used to lower fuel into the core of the reactor and eventually to take it out again. The board has now stated that 2 of these standpipes have been damaged by corrosion. One of the pipes is beneath this cover, but you can't actually see the corrosion because everything down there is highly radioactive. The problem has occurred in the area where the standpipes pass through the concrete shield of the reactor. The corrosion narrows the pipes. The board says that the fuel can still get through safely, but the Nuclear Installations Inspectorate today told us that the reactor must shut down in November for inspection and possible repair work. Last weekend, we saw just how urgently the board scientists are now tackling the problem. Saturday was open day at the Barclays Nuclear Laboratories, the first for 8 years. The public could see the extraordinary depth of research that goes into Britain's reactor program. All over the labs, top scientists acted as salesmen for an industry that badly needs friends. But in one lab, work was going on more or less as usual. This is surface analysis, which involves the study of rust.
Move away with it. Go back to the crack tip. Cracks up here. Cracks in that direction. Go back to the crack tip and try and get another section from the crack tip here.
In a small back room, 2 specialists were working night and morning to examine rust from the Hinckley reactor. We were told that the problem is affecting other reactors as well.
This is the best sort of ductile area I've seen in this crevasse, so I think we'll have a look here as well. If we could take a lower mag picture.
When we tried to interview one of the scientists, a CEGB public relations man moved in and stopped us.
Here on that surface, and something's rubbed along here.
Well, I'm very worried indeed, because of course we were told some years ago that the corrosion problems, which incidentally caused them to derate, to reduce the power of the Magnoxes by 18% on the instructions of the Nuclear Installations Inspectorate, we were told that those problems had ceased. It's now perfectly evident that they haven't. Indeed, the problems which I have been trying to get the CEGB to come clean about since about December last year, related to the standpipes, are revealed not just to refer to Hinckley Point, but to be fairly broadly across the whole of the industry where Magnoxes are concerned. Now, this is a matter of great concern.
So, as far as you're concerned, obviously speaking as a layman, the significant thing is that corrosion problems, which the industry had assured everybody had been dealt with, are still there.
There, and by all the evidence, getting worse.
Evidence that corrosion problems are widespread comes from confidential CEGB documents leaked to Friends of the Earth. Board engineers are varying the mix of coolant gas in an effort to reduce the rate of rusting or oxidation. Dungeon SA.
Oxidation failure is predicted.
Bradwell.
Failure probabilities for bolts.
And Bradwell again.
Oxide growth.
At Sizewell, a suspected safety problem. Components might fall into the reactor and prevent coolant getting to the radioactive fuel.
Complete failure of the shield attachment wells could represent a potential hazard to the reactor.
The justification for this work is reactor safety.
The Magnox was built in many variations, but all have one basic design problem. The only access to the inside of the reactor is from the refueling area, the so-called pile cap. All inspections, all repair work, have to be done by remote control from the pile cap surface.
Because the corrosion affects parts inside the reactor that are inaccessible. Inside the reactor, it's highly radioactive. There's steel components that are radiating. It's one of the problems with corrosion. So you cannot get to the components. In fact, certainly the components you cannot even get to check for the amount of corrosion that's going on. So the CEGB themselves have to, by inference, have to work out by supposition, if you like, how much corrosion is going on inside the reactor. They can only gauge by doing test work outside, putting samples in the reactor over short term, and then extrapolating on how much corrosion has occurred. Of course, you know, corrosion affects the strength of components.
How vital are the components that we're talking about?
Well, the major area of concern is with the cage that constrains or restrains the core. There's a cage that sits around the core and holds it together.
When the board had to derate the Magnox reactors more than 15 years ago, it was because of the corrosion of key components at the reactor core. The components were bolts, part of the steel cage which holds the graphite core of the reactor together. Today, the strength of these bolts is still a source of concern after 20 years of heat and rust. The forge where many of the bolts for the early Magnox reactors were made still exists in Birmingham, and bolts of more or less the original specification are still being turned out. With hindsight, it's now clear that the Magnox designers specified the wrong type of steel. Because they believed that corrosion would not be a major problem, they chose carbon steel, which can rust. We asked the company's chief metallurgist what condition he thought the bolts would now be in.
The main effect would be that over that period the bolt would soften. The strength would decrease gradually over the years. But added to that, you've got the problem of corrosion. That, combined with the softening, could weaken the boat significantly.
It's ironic that the brave new world of the nuclear age was based on a component that has hardly changed in 50 years. Thousands of steel bolts are at the heart of Britain's Magnox reactors, and their integrity could be vital to safety. Nuclear engineer John Large is concerned about what could happen in the event of a major accident.
The worst possible scenario, and I'm not saying it could happen, but it's a possibility it could happen, is that you could have an abrupt depressurization of one of the loops that goes outside the reactor. This would very rapidly, indeed, in a matter of seconds, depressurize the reactor pressure vessel.
The theoretical accident begins with the complete rupture of an upper gas coolant leg, an event the board says is incredible. The result would be a sudden, violent depressurization of the reactor. This, in turn, could produce a powerful outward thrust of the graphite core which contains the fuel. And if the bolts gave way, the core could fall out of shape, preventing the control rods from getting in and shutting the reactor down. Protest groups fear just such an accident at one of Britain's oldest reactors. The CEGB which runs them says such an event is impossible, but they refuse to put up a technical expert to take part in this film. Instead, we put the worries to the Director General of the Health and Safety Executive, the body which controls the inspectors of nuclear installations.
Well, as long ago as 1967, it was identified that there was a corrosion problem there. I should emphasize that you'd have to have a very, very considerable failure of a great many bolts before that presented the slightest risk to safety. What those bolts were doing is keeping steel restraining around the Magnox graphite blocks in place. Now, ever since that was identified, certain changes were made in the operating conditions within the reactor so as to reduce the ongoing level of corrosion to a very small amount. And that is constantly monitored, and it's well within the range, we believe, at present, where there is any prospect of the bolts, a significant number of the bolts failing, well within the range.
In retirement in Devon is a man who has watched the Magnox programme since the start. Sir Kelvin Spencer was chief scientist at the Ministry of Power when the Magnox reactors were designed. He now believes that they should be progressively shut down.
In the light of the Russian disaster, I would say take no more risks. Play for safety. The present government and their spokesman again and again have said that they give absolute priority to safety. Their actions, however, do not show that. If they did give maximum priority to safety, then there's no doubt that they would speed up the closing down of the first generation of nuclear stations, namely the Magnox ones.
I believe you've got to judge each reactor, each power station on its merits. You've got to examine it, see if you're satisfied that it's a perfectly operable and safe plant, and if it is, I can see no reason for shutting it down. If you shut down the Magnox reactors, this is £2 billion or £3 billion